some chips.
Well, here we are on the front lines of the Cold War.
Where are the front lines of the Cold War?
In the trenches.
That's the thing about the Cold
War.
In
relationships is where the front lines are.
There are no front lines, right?
Oh.
Well, okay, maybe like Cuba and
the front
Eastern
lines
Bloc.
What do you mean? Oh, of the actual Cold War.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, okay, but our Cold War front lines are in interactions.
In the hearts and minds of women and men everywhere.
Yeah, okay. And
They're definitely in there.
Yeah, so this is part 2.
That's also pretty big.
It's about the other Cold War series. It's part 2 of the discussion about women and men's gender differences.
That was a little abstract.
It was.
But it kind of makes me think of how the Big Bang happened. It wasn't like an explosion, supposedly, of a single point exploding outward forever, but an explosion that happened everywhere at the same time.
What?
Yeah. More like a surface of a balloon expanding. Space is expanding everywhere all at the same time.
Oh.
As opposed to a single thing that exploded outward.
Okay. Interesting.
Anyways, I don't know why I connected those two.
I don't know either.
I apologize. I've been on a black hole kick for a while.
Yeah, that's cool.
But,
very clear.
But I digress. Back to the Cold War.
That's cool. We digress here. That's what we do. Okay, so picking up where we left off, we talked a lot about the female brain, both the organ and the book by Luann Brizendine.
Yeah.
And now we're gonna shift gears a little bit and talk about. Well, we're gonna draw more from a book called Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. I know I've referenced it many times here before. Very good. It's a very good book. So he talks about how there's generally a different approach to upbringing for boys and girls, which affects their emotional development. To me, this is pretty clearly a mix. Before we talked about how there's some things that are cultural in nature, and there's definitely a nurture element to what we perceive in gender differences.
Yeah.
But we also believe the evidence is strong that there's physiological differences, certain physiological differences. We can't explain everything by that, or blame everything on those.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to upbringing, there's clearly a mix of both physiology and culture. Okay. But first, back to the female brain quickly. So she talks about how the girl brain is wired for connection and preserving harmonious relationships. Whereas she says that most boys don't share this intense desire for verbal connection, which results from that. So attempts at verbal intimacy with she's talking about young girls and young boys. She said that, a girl's attempt at verbal intimacy with male contemporaries can be met with disappointing results.
Yeah. Which is why the Hallmark Channel is so appealing. And all those books that have Victorian era men that share their feelings and talk about them openly.
I've noticed this recently in my own life. There's, I'm going to preserve the identity of the innocent, but there's a girl I like a lot. She lives in another state.
My eyebrows raised.
I've just found that it's hard that the only way we can connect right now is verbally over the phone. As a man, it's not that I can't talk about anything, but at the same time, that is not. It's not as engaging for men.
Which is funny because I was talking about with my engagement being long distance and how much I value that we have that time to talk over the phone. As a female, I love that connection, that kind of type of connection. It's harder for you as a male.
Yeah,
depends on the relationship. Like I've been in relationships that were, I got a lot out of the verbal communication. Even so much so that I was wanting to not spend as many days together so that we could talk more, because when we would be together we'd end up just cuddling and not talking as much. But that didn't go over very well, but it was and this is one of those things that, again, there's definitely going to be variation. And in fact, I also think, thinking back to my own childhood, I was much more of a I think because Paul and I are both more emotional, on the scale.
Certainly as a kid, I was really sensitive and very emotional, and
yeah, me too.
For whatever reasons, my trajectory lately has been I've become more traditionally male, I think. Which I think has been I think that's been positive for me, positive development. But certainly as a young boy, like I had a harder time fitting in with people where I couldn't talk about emotions and like deeper things. Whereas the friends, guy friends or girlfriends where I did have that was like really important for me. So.
It's interesting to me when you were talking about how females prefer harmony. But it's interesting to me, though, that females are also more okay with disagreements and talking about them openly and stuff. You know what I mean? It's like
because it leads to harmony.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is.
I think there's a lot of nuance.
It's not an artificial harmony.
I think there's a lot of I think there's a decent amount of nuance to that. Because you're right. I think it's more important to them, so they're more motivated.
Yeah.
I think failing at that can be a harder blow, and that actually, Brizendine and Goleman both talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we just paused briefly because I had to kill a spider that was crawling around behind Bryce, and he didn't know about it.
And it freaked me out.
It was the funniest thing.
We were just joking how my amygdala was going crazy with a fight or flight response, and I chose flight.
Yeah. And and Shayla talked about how she got brave and killed the spider, even though she didn't want to.
All by myself, and then I hyperventilated for 5 minutes afterwards. But there was no one else to kill it, and I couldn't let it just live with me.
Paul's aggression centers were utilized for good social outcomes.
That's right. I immediately went to fight.
Yeah.
Which is also what I do in my dreams.
Interesting.
Yeah, I find in my dreams I do all kinds of brave things. In fact, I had this really awkward nightmare one time where some guy was chasing me in a parking lot, and somehow I had the wherewithal to think like, wait a minute, I don't run away from bad guys in my dreams. I chased him in my dreams, and I turned around and started running after him, and then he was running away from me.
Nice.
And then the end of the dream was when I got him into a headlock and started dragging him away. It was great.
Way to go, man.
It was weird to me though that I had that wherewithal to realize I was in a dream enough to change it, but to not wake up. Like I didn't realize it enough to wake up. But at any rate,
that's awesome.
I also had a female friend one time call me, and she was like a 45-minute drive away, and she asked me to come kill a spider because it was big and it was on her floor and it was looking at her. And
I can relate to that.
And times 8.
8 eyes.
It was looking at me. Yeah, I think they have 8. But maybe that's times 4. But anyways, but I called my brother who lived a lot closer, and I said, "Hey man, can you go kill the spider for her?" So he went and killed it for her.
I was on a date once where, and this is me writing off men for stupid reasons, right? But there was a spider, and he's like, "I'll go kill it," and he comes back and he said, "That was too big. It's still there. I couldn't kill it." And I was like, "This relationship is over. Like, if you can't kill a spider, I can't kill a spider. We cannot live in harmony together.
It can't last."
Needless to say, it didn't work out.
Needless to say.
Oh, man.
Well, people have broken up for stupider reasons.
Yeah,
sorry, actually, let me backtrack though.
Sure.
Actually, I just want to say, like, when people break up over stuff that we label as stupid, it's not stupid, right? It's important enough to them.
Yeah.
There's something underlying that's important enough that they feel like this is a no-go. So, anyway.
And sometimes that may be not being willing to work through their own things, which we can get to that later.
Yeah.
But
I just think in general we're too quick, and this is kind of what I conclude at the end of all this, but we're a little too quick to conclude, to label things and to conclude this person is just, or this relation is just X, Y, or Z, and so it can't work because it's just, or to assume the worst about what we perceive. Anyway, so back to science.
As always.
Okay, so we talked about how the girl brain is wired for connection and preserving harmonious relationships. The male brain, the boy brain, is not as much wired for that verbal connection. Okay, in emotional intelligence, he talks about how girls' more advanced facility with language allows them to be more articulate about emotions. So basically, they find that from an early age, girls, become more adept verbally at talking about emotional things. And they become more adept than boys at using words to explore and substitute for emotional reactions such as physical fights.
It's a war of words. Yeah.
Yeah, which has the potential to be a lot more constructive, right?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. But also, it could be more brutal.
It could be,
yeah,
but
depending on
in a different
how you
way.
look at it, yeah.
Yeah.
That is true. That whole sticks and stones thing. I mean,
sure.
Sometimes that's kind of backwards.
Sure.
You know, sometimes words do hurt more.
Yeah.
Like in the long run.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, another thing you find by age 13, there's clear gender differences emerge in how aggression is expressed. With girls, and we talked about this already, girls becoming adept at more covert and sophisticated relational aggression, and boys continuing to just be overtly confrontational. Right? So there's more like emotional, cognitive sophistication to women to girls at an early age.
You know, one of the interesting things too, though, is that like men can like straight up get in a fist fight and then be friends.
Sure. Like
right after and be like, all right, whatever.
Sure.
And it can cool down. There can be a very quick cool down period.
Sure.
For guys, whereas oftentimes for women that's not the case. Like it maybe doesn't rise to the level of fist fights, violence. But it maybe is a longer thing that lasts a lot longer.
Yeah.
You know, interesting. You say that, and I've been thinking through. Somebody recently told me, like, if you need help getting over something that you're mad about, just go punch a pillow. And I was like, that's so silly. I do not, like, I don't need to punch something, but it is surprisingly therapeutic. And now when I'm really mad, I'll go punch a pillow or I'll go out and just do something really aggressive physically.
Interesting.
And it's surprising how therapeutic that is.
You know what? And
it really helps.
As a historically sensitive male who's less sensitive now, but like I found that the more I like go to the gym and work out, like it has a huge like the same kind of thing.
Doing I used to go for runs when I would get mad, and I've stopped doing
can
that.
ail a lot of what's bothering us emotionally.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe men have it right.
Exactly. Could be a benefit of being a man.
Yeah.
But do you first envision the pillow as the face of a person? And do you first talk with it to verbally get all your aggression out? Like, this
I
is
don't
what you did
envision
wrong.
it as a face, but I do talk to. I usually yell at it as I'm punching.
You say it in verbose ways too.
Why are you so stupid?
And the reason you're so stupid is this. And let me say it in another way. And because you've got more command of the language of talking about your emotions.
Yeah.
So you're like, furthermore, let me add this, and alternatively, I could put it this way. Okay. Kapow. This one's for the old man. All right. At any rate.
These differences in like verbal and emotional sophistication, like they continue into adulthood. I would say on average men are a lot, adult men are less adept at, explaining how they feel about things, explaining how those feelings might like be relevant to a certain situation.
Yeah.
Part of that is cultural. They just don't want to talk about it because men aren't supposed to have feelings. Right. Well, and in the workplace, no one is supposed to have feelings.
There's no crying in insurance. That's what we say during fourth quarter.
What's that?
There's no crying in insurance. Truth is, there's a lot of crying in insurance.
Right.
By the way, this is like a random aside, but it's also true that like the most in-depth conversations that you have with another guy I've found are oftentimes we're both like leaning against a car and not looking at each other for like half an hour. We're having this like real deep conversation, and then like the very end of the conversation, you're like 1 second eye contact. You're like, you know what I mean? And it's
the whole time there was no eye contact.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's when the real connection.
You're bearing your whole soul. And and you don't see that with a woman to woman interaction.
Yeah,
it's like eye contact. It's like laser, man.
Sure.
What about when you're talking to a female? Is it uncomfortable to look in the eyes during that serious conversation?
If it's like a female you're in a relationship with and you're like you're romantically involved, and no, that happens a lot more. I think guys are probably less prone to eye contact than women, even in relationships, is my guess. But
so good segue, Paul. Actually, I didn't quote it here, but that is something they find. Yeah, that babies. That female babies are looking at facial expression. They're way more interested in facial expression than boys are.
And boys are more interested in things. In fact, the author of The Female Brain, I remember this because she had a male baby. Mm-hmm. And I remember she was concerned. And she even thought that maybe it had like autism or something, or somewhere on the autistic spectrum, because it wouldn't look at her that much. Like she would pick it up and it would like want to look at everything else and go touch the doorknob and stuff like that. Yeah. It turns out it was just a normal male. It wasn't on the autistic spectrum. It's just guys' tendency to focus on things and how about a female baby? You can just sit there and stare in its eyes, and it loves that, man. It's just soaking it in.
Yeah.
It also, in one of the books, I think it was Emotional Intelligence. Now I'm not sure. You can correct me, but it said that females are more expressive in their faces because of that. So
yes,
the female face shows a lot more what you're thinking internally than the male face.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, for all you parents out there, I think I can't remember if it was in the female brain or if it was somewhere else that somebody said like this is why it sometimes can be good like when you're holding a baby. If you're holding a female baby, hold her facing you, and hold a male baby facing away from you because the baby wants to see everything else that's going on, like check stuff out.
Yeah,
and the female baby wants to like check you out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Brizendine, she says that at an early age, girls exhibit an interest in emotional expression and look for social cues, whereas boys lack such interest, making them... Actually, this might not be an exact quote. Anyway, yeah, boys lack that interest, which makes them more prone to unimpeded exploration. I think this explains a lot. Again, not perfectly, doesn't perfectly explain things, but, women at an early age exhibit a difference in how interested they are in the whole human experience and, visually as well as like emotionally. So Goleman, he says that girls end up becoming adept at reading verbal and nonverbal emotional signals, like we were talking about, and at expressing and communicating feelings, and boys become adept at minimizing emotions having to do with vulnerability, guilt, and fear. Yeah, I think there's a cultural element to that, and as well as a physiological element to it.
It's easy to see negatives about that. Yeah. Like, okay, women are at least dealing with their emotions directly, and men are trying to get away from some of these emotions. Yeah. But
and they probably feel relatively less emotion, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, do you think there's positives that come from that too? I mean, what are the benefits about running away from emotions?
We'll have to read the male brain to find that. No, but it has to do with, we're more focused on things. I think we're more willing to take risks. We're more interested in the exploration because we're not
emotional risks.
We're not as worried so much about, and I think this is important actually. And I don't know if they spell this out explicitly. I can't remember.
Maybe our emotions don't shut us down as much when we need to get something done. I don't know.
Women are more interested in the social appropriateness and the relationships. They do spell this out explicitly. So in some ways they have more rules that they want to follow, that they're willing to follow than men who aren't even as cognizant of all of those rules. And we have lots of examples of that, right? I know in my life, I'm a little torn on this, but it's important to me to follow, good moral conduct. But at the same time, I don't like rules that are stupid, that I think are made up, even if breaking those rules might make me a little bit of a social outcast in other people's eyes. I'm guessing women are less willing to step outside of convention in that way.
I am, at least. I don't know about other women, but yeah.
I would guess most.
I think you're right.
I remember in the female brain too, when she was talking about children playing, females are more likely to ask a question of the other children, like house, or what you want to play house, and they'll ask it as a question though to the group, and boys will be more likely to be like, army, let's play army, or they'll just say it like, this is what we're doing. Girls will be more likely to ask.
Oh, interesting.
It's more of a group think kind of thing. Like,
interesting. Very interesting.
Should we do this?
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Even with getting together with my girlfriends for dinner. Where should we go for dinner? Well, what do you think? Well, I don't care. I don't care either. It's so
that sounds terrible to me.
I hate it. I hate it.
Oh, you hate it too.
But most women are like that.
Sure. And why do you think that is?
Probably because they're trying to keep the peace and they don't care that much. They're just, even if they have an opinion, they don't want to be the one to make everybody mad. So they're just trying to be kind about it.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, wanted to go to this restaurant. I don't know what they serve, but it's amazingly close. And they say, let's do this.
Which I also think, on dates, when the guy says, this is where we're going to a restaurant, I love that.
Oh, yeah.
I love that he doesn't have to, we don't have to go through all the feelings about how everybody feels about this or who's going to be nicer. Yeah. I mean, it's nice sometimes they'll say, do you like this place or this place? And I can choose. But
that's just what I'll do.
When it's just an I don't care fest.
That's definitely an area where, I do have some female, quote unquote, female in me. That I do want to go. I do care about what people think. But I guess for me, it's not so much, I'm not worried about what they'll think if I express an unpopular opinion. It's just that I want to make sure that people's needs are being met or that their preferences are taken into account.
Right.
So maybe that's a little different.
Well, along these lines too, I'll point out that like, I do feel like when I've been in some of my relationships where the females wanted to talk more about like emotional stuff, like some of those have been pleasure. Those have been good conversations for me. Like I've appreciated their being able to kind of bring me out of not talking about emotional stuff, and that's been good. But I think that's different. Also, I think some of the Myers-Briggs stuff can play into this too. Like I think I'm an F. I think I like talking about emotions, like in general when it comes up. I maybe don't always think to bring it up, but like I know some of my friends that are like T's. They don't like talking about emotions. Like, in fact, one of the cartoons in one of this book I had, the girl was asking the guy, like, I feel this when you do this or whatever. And the guy was like, there's that word again, feel. and he was like,
irrelevant.
If I hear that word one more time, like he was like about to explode.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move on.
Do it.
So women, this is back to Goleman. Women on average experience the entire range of emotions with greater intensity and volatility than men. Again, a lot of that I think has to do with just hormonal changes. Because again, he was talking about how girls end up becoming adept at reading verbal and nonverbal emotional signals and expressing and communicating feelings. And how boys become adept at minimizing their emotions, having to do with vulnerability, guilt, and fear. So anyway, he sums this up. All of this means that, in general, women come into a marriage groomed for the role of emotional manager, while men arrive with much less appreciation of the importance of this task for helping a relationship survive. And I didn't write it in here, but he goes on to say that in some ways this leads them to maybe a Pollyanna-ish view about the relationship, where he thinks everything is going great.
Right.
And the woman's like, nope, you're not seeing the whole picture here. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Which I've seen that in friends I've talked to. Like, there's one friend who, like, he thought things were going great with a girl he was dating when, kind of out of the blue, she cut off ties. And he was totally, like, shocked. Like, he didn't know what happened. I'm sure there were signs, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff, man. I had a thought, but I can't remember.
Oh, man.
I know.
Okay, well, I'll keep going.
I did too. Wait, I almost found it. Hang on a second. Oh, okay. So he goes on to talk about the Pollyanna thing, and he says, combine men's rosy view of marriage with their aversion to emotional confrontations, and it is clear why wives so often complain that their husbands try to wiggle out of discussing troubling things.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting. It's not necessarily that they're trying to wiggle out of it, but it's just kind of the way they think and the way their view is that they just...
Which it's kind of a incomplete view. And this is what we talked about actually in our first episode, that men's compartmentalization. They don't necessarily have the full view of things. It might be a more focused view, but it doesn't take everything into account.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you want to go here right now, but I know. But we were going to talk about how men are more likely to get flooded, though.
Oh yeah, we do want to talk about that. Okay,
and, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll keep going. So okay, I thought this was interesting. So Robert Josephs at the University of Texas, he concluded some research by saying that men's self-esteem derives more from their ability to maintain independence from others, while women's self-esteem is maintained, in part at least, by the ability to sustain intimate relationships with others. Absolutely true for me. Like, my self-esteem is strongly tied to my independence and my what's the word? Adequacy to complete tasks. And I say this, like, looking at my experience with depression is in some obvious ways is very different from some of my siblings' depression. Theirs is a lot more about self-worth, how they fit into, like, if they're a good person or not, that kind of stuff. For me, it's been very much about, like, feeling that I can accomplish goals and take care of myself. It's been about my independence.
Does that correlate along gender lines in your family? Is that like what you're saying? Or?
I guess I'm just saying, in my experience, I agree with what Robert Joseph says about self-esteem. Yeah. That for men, it has more to do with maintaining independence.
I think that's true a lot for women too. Like for me, if somebody doesn't like me, that's a big deal to me. Yeah. If somebody doesn't want to work at a relationship with me, that hurts my self-esteem. Like, well, why not? Like, we can work through this or we can figure things out. Yeah. But also, I think because of being single in my mid-30s, independence is important to me, but it hasn't always been.
Sure.
So that's kind of come in as a role, as a necessity, not so much as a thing that was always there.
Right.
Whereas human connection has always been important to me in relationships, interpersonal relationships with people.
Yeah, and that's a good example of why we can't neatly boil this all down to gender difference, because there's some nuance.
Those are good points. No, I agree in general that I think about like my career and stuff that factors in heavily into like how I'm feeling about myself to some extent. Or so I don't know. I mean, I do care what people think about me too, though. Sure. And I was sensitive as a child. I've remained so that way probably more than you have to some extent. But so I do care about that stuff too. Yeah. But I mean, I don't know. I guess it all factors in a little bit. But
yeah. Okay. So
go ahead. But I was just gonna say like how you were talking about flooding now and how guys.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about
guys are more likely to get like overloaded and.
Yeah. So I thought this was very interesting, very relevant when we're talking about like how we manage conflict. So Goleman, he talks a lot in his book about emotional hijackings in the brain, and this is essentially we have these two major brain circuits for processing information and then acting according. And there's also another product placement. There's a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Nobel-winning guy named Daniel Kahneman. And he talks about this in great detail because it's a very long book. Yeah. I just got it on the audiobook. It'll be great. But he basically there's this slow, deliberate, more accurate rational brain, which taps into the prefrontal cortex, which we referred to earlier, which is where rational decision making is made. So that's the slow circuit, and then there's a fast circuit, is the one that goes in the limbic system, goes into the amygdala, to some other parts of the brain there, and that's our primitive, fast, prone to inaccuracies and overreactions. Yeah. That's that part of the brain. And he talks about how, in a sudden moment of crisis, instinctively it's our limbic brain that kicks in, sometimes to terrible effect. Like he talks about, this like parent who like accidentally shot his child or something, thinking it was an intruder or something.
It's just trying to keep us alive. But
that's right. It's kind of ill-suited to the modern world in some ways. Anyway. So basically he talks about emotional hijackings where the limbic system circumvents the slower thinking brain as part of an emotion-based response to some perceived threat. He cites John Gottman's work. This is another big name in these fields. Yeah. John Gottman, he's a very well-respected researcher of relationships. So Goleman cites Gottman's work regarding flooding, which is kind of like prolonged limbic hijackings due to frequent emotional distress triggered by negative thoughts. And he talks about this in the context of relationships, where flooding becomes this self-perpetuating emotional hijacking that's reinforced by and then greatly amplifies repeated negativity. So I can speak to give an example of what I mean. Like there was this woman I worked with. It was very stressful. We trying to preserve the innocent. We were peers, but there was also it was a difficult situation. It was difficult working with her, and I remember there were some periods of time where like it was actually at the time I was reading this book, so it was very helpful. But like where I was getting flooded, like where things were tense between us. She'd say things that were kind of innocuous, and I would take it totally the wrong way and overreact. Maybe it would be more snippy. I slammed at more than one door in frustration once after meeting with her. In some ways, this was just the nature of a relationship that we were pretty open.
Okay.
But in some ways, it was bad. But yeah, I remember sometimes I'd just be like, I am so worked up right now. I need to go outside and take a walk and
punch a pillow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it's going to have your face on it. Right?
Yeah.
Was she cool with that? Like when you just said it that way, like I need to get out of here.
To her credit, like she in some way, well,
I mean, was it hard for you? You needed to take a break from the conversation because you were all worked up.
Yeah, and I would say we both grew in our like awareness and our ability to manage these conflicts to some extent. Where we could recognize, hey, I'm really worked up. Let's go take a break. Which is productive, right? So anyway, I'm blabbing. You guys, what do you guys think?
But kind of the point of that anecdote is that in general, though, men tend to get flooded more often.
That's right,
women.
and it was like, based on sequential perceptions of negativity, and some of it really was negativity. Like it wasn't just perceived, or my perceptions were accurate.
And this might tie back into the fact that what we were talking about earlier, maybe the last episode, about how women have a greater command of language about talking about talking about emotional stuff in general. They talk about it more, and men aren't used to that as much, and it's difficult. And talking about it for too long, stuff that like gets us emotional for too long, like we kind of tend to shut down and want to like go into a cave, and like we just like can't keep talking about it to some extent sometimes.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of this is about training and how much of this is about biology.
Yeah. I have a friend who I think, again, protect the innocent, not to use names or situations, but I think we flood each other. Like we both feel flooded in our friendship at all times, and that's hard to escape. It's something you have to be able to recognize and see and work through.
Even innocuous, things that are said between each other.
We both get offended by things that we should not be offended by.
Yeah, and that's hard. I think the first way to find a way out is for both people to somehow recognize this is what's happening. That we're flooded. We're emotional, more than is justified.
Right.
And biologically, it's absolutely authentic. That's how you feel. But just to know, like. This is biological. They're not trying to destroy.
We're not trying to offend each other. We're just, our brains are just going crazy right now.
Yeah. So Goleman cites this. He says that gender differences in emotional life prove to be a hidden spur to marital breakdowns. He says even after decades of marriage, women don't mind the unpleasantness of a marital squabble nearly as much as the men. He says husbands are prone to flooding at a lower intensity of negativity than are their wives. More men than women react to their spouse's criticism with flooding. I think that's true. Men, I mean, no one likes to be criticized, but I think it really is men are more prone to be set off by it. He says that men's, this lower tolerance for emotional conflict suggests the possibility that the stoic Clint Eastwood type of male imperturbability may represent a defense against feeling emotionally overwhelmed. I think that's so significant.
Yeah.
We don't deal as well with shaming either.
Yeah.
And I've heard that like men are way worse at dealing with that.
Yeah.
Shame is really hard for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true, man. We just like shut down, and I've been in situations like that where I'm like, I can't even like. It's hard for me to talk about this. It depends on the relationship. I've been in relationships where there's a lot of emotional talk, but really all that's needed is we need to like hug it out.
Sure.
And like. And the conversation will go to a good place in a few minutes, and those have been good experiences. When I've been in relationships where we tend to have that dynamic, that's great.
Yeah.
But I've also been in relationships where there's emotionally charged negative discussions, and it's hard for me because I'm thinking logically, and I can't logically see my way through this discussion. Like I can't logically see a solution. I can't see how the emotion is logical. Like I can't see how it makes sense to the situation or whatever. And that sometimes is difficult for me because then sometimes it just feels like raw emotion. That's
you're saying you have a hard time seeing how the other person's emotions are logical?
Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes I'll have. Depending on the relationship, but I know I've been in one where I felt like there was a lot of emotion that to me. It didn't seem to like make sense.
Yeah.
It seemed to be like emotion about things that I didn't understand why they would be so emotional, kind of thing.
Sure.
From a logical perspective, and that was
which
difficult.
Could also have to do with people's past and backgrounds and things that we don't get.
In that case, it was. It was. it was a traumatic events in the past that I did not know about at the time.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that I found out about later that she told me about afterwards.
Yeah.
But that was difficult for me because my reaction to that kind of thing, where it was like, I don't understand where this emotions come from. It doesn't make sense to me logically why this would be happening. And it just feels to me like just...
I hope you jumped in with a mansplanation.
I was like, got my suspenders on. Actually, on the contrary, I just totally shut down. I was like, I do not know how to react to this. Like, I have no reaction to this. I'm speechless. Like, I did not. It was kind of like we were talking about. I felt emotionally flooded very fast in that kind of situation.
Oh, and you probably felt a little bit rejected, even.
Yeah, I felt rejected,
Yeah.
And I felt like I have no idea what to think about this. Even
Yeah.
it's like it was hard for me to process it. I was just like, I just want to get away from this situation.
Yeah.
So, anyways, yeah, it's an example of that.
Yeah, man.
Anyways,
good stuff.
Probably better. What's a good?
Well,
how would we conclude this?
Yes. How can we conclude? Okay. Hold on. One more thing.
Okay.
The female brain, this is Brizendine again. She says, this actually seems a little bit in conflict with that men having a lower threshold. But I don't think it is. Female brain has a far more negative alert reaction to relationship conflict and rejection than does the male brain. Men often enjoy interpersonal conflict and competition. They even get a positive boost from it. In women, conflict is more likely to set in motion a cascade of negative chemical reactions, create feelings of stress, upset, and fear. I suspect the context matters completely. I think in a romantic relationship, it's more intimate. The stakes are higher. There's more potential to hurt and be hurt. I think, I think men enjoy interpersonal conflict if there's no like stakes attached to it, like, arguing with people on Facebook or something. They might get like a dopamine burst of like, I'm going to, prove him wrong. Anyway.
Yeah, I walked away from conversations with men where they have later said that was such a good conversation, and I walk away saying I was so frustrated and mad at you.
That was the worst one ever. Yeah,
but it's the fighting thing, conflict and competition thing. They loved it, and I hated it.
Yeah, and it might have to do with the nature of the conversation. If it was about how their behaviors or their habits are like negatively impacting a relationship, they might enjoy that a lot less than if it's about sports or something impersonal.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, you remember when we had James and Erica on, and James's family likes to debate a lot, and Erica talked about how if she comes out of a conversation with them without being offended, it's a miracle. And I felt the same way, like when I was back in the days.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, thank you, Paul, for moving us on to conclusions and thoughts. So, based on all this, it's my assertion that men and women, especially single men and single women, don't know that about or accept these gender differences, these general gender differences, which I think perpetuates a rift between men and women. That rift can often look like this: that the women berate the men, they unfairly judge men. For a variety of reasons, whether that's the men aren't as emotionally adept as they'd like. They don't communicate feelings. They withdraw from criticism. They don't conform to social mores, which to the woman are so obviously important. Like, not just important, but like critical, right? This has happened to me. I know it's happened to Paul as well, because we didn't conform to a girl's expectations of what a good person is or a righteous person, that she viewed us as bad. Okay. So I think the rift often looks like that on the women's side. For men, it can look like that they don't like to be berated, but also failing to understand what can be done about it. And or successfully making adjustments that will actually make them more appealing and more enjoyable to the woman, right? If a man has no emotional vocabulary, he has little awareness of little emotional intelligence, I'd say, that leaves a big empty spot in a relationship with most women.
Right.
It can also look like him consequently withdrawing from women who are actually really great prospects, and maybe seeking women who aren't as good prospects.
Yeah. Yeah, Lisa Snell, that dating coach. So I know she talks about one of the pieces of advice she gives to men often is talk about the emotions of your day or whatever, When you're talking with a girl, like talk about what emotions did you feel and why.
Yeah.
Guys don't normally tend to go there.
The good news is that
helps women to relate.
This kind of emotional intelligence that we're talking about here can be learned.
Yeah.
Again, and for most of it, I think women are more likely to develop it, but men can too. So I also think that, what these gender differences teach us is that, well, on the one hand, we can't outright excuse behaviors that harm other people or that hamper the health of a relationship. Even if those differences, draw, to some significant extent from our biological natures. Hang on. I like what I wrote. Well, we can't outright excuse, behavior that hurts people or that is hurting the relationship. On the other hand, I think that we can be a lot more tolerant and patient and grateful when we see efforts to acknowledge or rather when we see efforts to grow past these habits of thought and behavior that stem from our natures. Yeah. In other words, to be more informed about what each of us is up against.
And I think also to be honest with ourselves about what our own things are that we need to work through. If we're not willing to work through our own things, we can't expect somebody else to be willing to work through theirs.
Absolutely. And that's huge. It's way easier, from the New Testament we know, Jesus taught that, instead of looking at the mote, the speck in your neighbor's eye, you should look at the beam in your own eye first. And that after you remove that, you'll see more clearly.
Right.
In the end, we only can change ourselves.
Yeah. We can have some influence on other people.
We can influence others.
But if we have not,
if they want to be influenced,
that's right. And if they're willing to be influenced by us, if we are someone worthy of exerting influence, which maybe we're not.
I also think a lot of times we complain, like, why am I always attracting the same type of guy or the same type of girl? But if we turned and looked at ourselves, that's probably the reason, because we're attracting like attracts like. Yeah. And so if we take the time to heal that part of ourselves, we'll start to attract healthier relationships in general.
As a coach, if I heard that, I would say, hey, that's a good question to start with. Let's explore that some more, because that's the right question to be asking. Yeah. But we need to figure out why. Yeah, what is behind that? So anyway, I think, the more we can appreciate these differences, as well as efforts to try and improve upon them, the better equipped we'll be to build bridges. And
it's useful to not go immediately to like the way you're doing it is wrong and the way I'm doing it is right. As opposed to saying like we're naturally going to do these things differently, and that's not bad. Right. Like right. It may lead to difficulties, but now, it might be good too.
You need to find a way to work together.
It's more fair if you want to have a conversation to say the way you did this, it made me feel this way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's at least a better place to start when you want to have a conversation, because you're not labeling them as the enemy. You're expressing how you were affected by something. Right. Now, again, to go somewhere productive with there requires emotional maturity and ability to work through that. But okay, one more thing I want to say. That blaming others, jumping to conclusions, judging harshly, holding grudges, those all have a visceral and an intuitive appeal. But they also have a tendency to blind us to our own internal obstacles. This is, I guess, what you already said. While simultaneously driving wedges between ourselves and others. On the other hand, charitably giving each other the benefit of the doubt, patiently supporting each other and making changes, even when the other person slips up or manages themselves badly. And then honestly confronting and working on our own issues goes a long way in nurturing connections that can flourish. And those are my final thoughts.
That's it. That's a good final thought.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, I think that's basically a wrap.
Okay, that's a wrap.
Well, we'll talk more about Cold War stuff.
The other Cold War, later. Yeah, but thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Shayla.
Thanks, everyone.
For being awesome.
Thanks for having me again. It's been great.
And we'll talk to you all later.
All right. Take
Goodbye.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing on iTunes or your favorite podcasting app and give us a rating. Thank you.